Some secrets are meant to be buried, spoken only in the hushed tones of a language few understand. For Gideon Blackwood, a billionaire titan of industry, Japanese was the perfect veil for his deception. He sat in the most exclusive restaurant in New York, spinning a web of lies worth billions, confident in his privacy. But he didn't account for the waitress serving his $500 bottle of wine. He saw her as part of the decor, invisible and insignificant. He never imagined that this quiet, unassuming young woman was a linguistic ghost, fluent in the very language he used as his shield. He never knew that his career, his empire, and his freedom were all balanced on the edge of the single word she was about to understand. This is the story of how a waitress's quiet reply started a seismic shock that brought a titan to his knees overnight. The air in Ethelgard's was so thick with money it felt like a different element. It was a carefully curated atmosphere, a symphony of hushed conversations, the delicate clinking of silver on porcelain, and the almost imperceptible scent of truffle oil and old leather. For Sophia Rossi, a 23-year-old art student who spent her days wrestling with canvases and the fumes of turpentine, stepping into Ethelgard's for her evening shift was like crossing into another dimension. Here she wasn't Sophia, the scholarship student living on instant noodles and dreams. She was a ghost in a crisp black uniform, her long auburn hair pulled back into a severe bun, her face a mask of polite neutrality. Her purpose was to be present but unseen, anticipating needs before they were voiced, a silent cog in a machine of extravagant indulgence. Her feet already ached in the sensible, yet unforgiving, black flats Robert the maître d' insisted upon. He was a man carved from granite and procedure, his standards as high as the restaurant's gilded ceilings. Precision, Rossi, anticipation. Our clientele does not pay for service. They pay for an experience of seamless perfection. You are not a person here. You are an extension of that perfection. Sophia understood. She'd learned the intricate dance of serving the city's elite. She knew which patrons preferred their water with a single wedge of lime, not a slice, who took their espresso with a twisted lemon peel on the side, and who, like the man at table 7, must never under any circumstances be offered the dessert menu. It was a form of art in a way, a performance piece in observation and subtlety. The tips paid her rent for a closet-sized apartment in a less glamorous part of Brooklyn, and more importantly, funded the expensive oil paints and canvases that were her true lifeblood. Her art was her rebellion against the muted, orderly world of Ethelgard's. In her small studio apartment, canvases exploded with color and raw emotion. She painted cityscapes not as they were, but as they felt, jagged, lonely, and illuminated by flashes of profound beauty. Her biggest project, a triptych titled Babel, depicted a modern city under a fractured sky, with people speaking in colors and symbols, their words failing to connect. It was a theme that resonated deep within her soul. Her fascination with language, with the gaps between what is said and what is understood, came from her grandmother, her Obasan. Hanai Tanaka had been a Japanese war bride, a woman plucked from the ruins of post-war Nagasaki and dropped into the alien landscape of rural Oregon. She had met Sophia's grandfather, a kind but simple American soldier, and followed him home. But while her body had left Japan, her heart and her language had remained. In a town where she was the only one of her kind, Hanai had built a fortress of silence around herself, speaking only Japanese. Sophia's father, born and raised in America, had only ever learned a few broken phrases. From the age of 5, Sophia had spent every summer with her. It was in that small, quiet house, filled with the scent of green tea and cedar, that Sophia had learned her grandmother's tongue. It wasn't a choice, it was a necessity. To know her grandmother, to hear her stories of cherry blossoms and loss, to understand the deep, unyielding sadness in her eyes, Sophia had to learn Japanese. Her Obasan taught her not just the words, but the culture behind them, the importance of honor, the weight of a person's word, and the disgrace of a lie. Kodadama, she would say, her voice a soft rasp. The spirit of words. They have power, Sophia-chan, to build and to destroy. Use them with care. Her grandmother had passed away 2 years ago, But the language she had gifted Sophia remained, a secret garden in her mind that no one else knew she possessed. It was a part of her heritage she rarely, if ever, had a reason to use in her New York life. It felt like a relic of a past self, a key to a door that no longer existed. Tonight, the restaurant was buzzing with a particular kind of energy. Table 12, the prime corner booth with a panoramic view of the park, was reserved for Gideon Blackwood. The name alone sent a ripple of tension through the staff. Blackwood wasn't just wealthy, he was a force of nature, the CEO of the global energy conglomerate Titan Energy Corp. He was a man who built and destroyed on a whim, whose face graced the covers of business magazines with headlines like "The Future's Architect" or "The Man Who Owns the Sun." His company was currently lauded for its massive green energy initiative, Project Nightingale, a series of offshore wind farms promising to power the entire eastern seaboard with clean, sustainable energy. He was a modern-day king, and he treated the world as his court. "Table 12, Rossi," Robert said, his voice low and tight. "Mr. Blackwood is entertaining guests from the Kibo Future Energies Consortium. They're American representatives. Everything must be flawless. Do you understand?" "Yes, Robert." "Flawless," Sophia repeated, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. She had served Blackwood once before. He had a way of looking straight through her, his eyes cold and dismissive. He'd complained that his steak was 2 degrees past medium rare and had Robert discount the entire bill. Not because he needed the money, but because he could. He was a man who enjoyed the exercise of power for its own sake. Sophia took a deep, steadying breath, straightened her apron, and prepared for the performance. She approached the table just as Blackwood and his 2 guests were being seated. Blackwood was exactly as she remembered him, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that probably cost more than her tuition, with a mane of silver hair and a predatory stillness. His guests were 2 sharply dressed Japanese men in their late 50s, their faces polite but guarded. She recognized them from a business journal Chloe, her roommate, had left on their coffee table. Ken Thompson and Harry Finch, the top U.S.-based executives for the Japanese investment firm. "Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Sophia, and I will be your server tonight. May I start you with some water for the table? We have still or sparkling." Blackwood didn't even look at her. He waved a dismissive hand. "Sparkling, and a bottle of the '05 Chateau Margaux. Don't dawdle." He immediately turned back to his guests and, assuming a cone of privacy granted by the arrogance of his station, switched from English to fluent, colloquial Japanese. Sophia's mind, accustomed to the familiar cadence of her grandmother's voice, locked onto the language instinctively. It was like hearing a song from her childhood. She moved away from the table to retrieve the wine, the familiar words washing over her, their meaning registering as clearly as if they were spoken in English. "Thompson-san, Finch-san, I am so glad we could finally sit down together," Blackwood began in Japanese, his tone shifting from the clipped, arrogant English to something more conspiratorial and smooth. "New York has its charms, does it not?" The 2 men murmured their agreement, their posture still formal. Sophia returned with the wine, her movements fluid and practiced. As she presented the bottle to Blackwood, uncorked it, and poured a small amount for him to taste, their conversation continued, a river of sound that only she, in this entire restaurant of English speakers, could fully comprehend. Blackwood swirled the wine, sniffed it, and nodded his approval without glancing at her. As she filled the other glasses, he leaned in closer to his guests. "Now, about Project Nightingale," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "I know your board has some final reservations about the turbine specifications. I want to assure you, personally, that they are unfounded." Sophia's hands were steady, but her heart began to beat a little faster. This was the deal of the century, the project that had branded Gideon Blackwood as savior of the environment. Mr. Thompson, the older of the 2 guests, replied, his Japanese precise and formal. "Our engineers are concerned about the materials. The reports on the cobalt-thorium alloy used for the rotor hubs suggest potential for microfracturing under sustained high-velocity stress. The North Atlantic is not a forgiving environment." Blackwood let out a low chuckle, a sound devoid of any real humor. He took a sip of his wine, and then he spoke the words that would change everything. Your engineers are excellent, he said, the lie dripping from his tongue like honeyed poison. They are absolutely correct. The alloys are substandard, but they are also a fraction of the cost. The official inspection reports have been, shall we say, optimized. The turbines will pass every initial test. They will generate power, and our stock will soar. By the time those microfractures become critical failures in 7 to 10 years, we will have already cashed out, paid our dividends, and sold the entire operation to the public utility grid. It will be their problem then, a maintenance issue. Sophia froze for a microsecond, her hand hovering over the last glass. Her blood ran cold. He wasn't just cutting corners. He was knowingly, willfully building a catastrophe, an environmental disaster waiting to happen, built on a foundation of lies and greed, funded by these men and subsidized by the public. He was defrauding investors and endangering an entire coastline. She finished pouring the wine, her movements a masterpiece of feigned calm. She placed the bottle on the table, gave a slight, deferential bow, and stepped away, her mind reeling. The gilded cage of Ethelgard's suddenly felt like a crime scene, and she was the only witness. The invisible girl had just heard an unspeakable truth, spoken in a language no one thought she knew. The rest of the world seemed to fade into a dull, muffled roar. The clatter of cutlery, the murmur of distant conversations, the soft strains of the string quartet in the corner. It all became background noise to the venomous whispers still echoing in Sophia's mind. She retreated to the sommelier station, her back pressed against the cool marble, trying to regulate her breathing. Her hands, which had been so steady just moments before, now trembled slightly. The alloys are substandard. The reports have been optimized. It will be their problem then. The words played on a loop, each repetition colder and more monstrous than the last. This wasn't just corporate malfeasance. It was a betrayal on a colossal scale. Project Nightingale was a beacon of hope for so many. It was on billboards, in commercials with soaring eagles and happy children. Gideon Blackwood had positioned himself as a visionary, a man cleaning the planet, and it was all a lie. A calculated, cynical fraud that would eventually poison the very oceans he claimed to be saving. She risked a glance back at table 12. The three men were laughing now. Blackwood had his head thrown back, a picture of confident charm. Mr. Thompson and Mr. Finch seemed more at ease, their initial stiffness melting away under the influence of the expensive wine and Blackwood's disarming deception. They were being seduced by a master manipulator, and they had no idea the trap that was being laid. Her mind flashed back to her grandmother. She could almost see Hanai sitting in her small garden, carefully tending to her bonsai trees. "Honor is not what you show to the world, Sophia-chan," she used to say, her fingers delicately snipping a tiny branch. "It is what you do when no one is watching. It is the tree that stands straight even in an empty forest." Was this her empty forest? Was she the only one standing here, watching this monstrous lie take root? Her first instinct was primal, survival. Forget what you heard. Keep your head down, finish your shift, collect your tips, and go home to your canvas. Getting involved was insane. Gideon Blackwood could crush her like an insect. He could ruin her life with a single phone call. She was a waitress. He was a king. The power imbalance was so vast it was almost comical. Robert materialized at her elbow, his presence sharp and jarring. "Rossi, you're idling. Table 12 needs their appetizers. Get the order." The command snapped her back to the present. She had a job to do. She plastered the neutral expression back onto her face, picked up her notepad, and walked back toward the table, her legs feeling like lead. As she approached, Blackwood was in the middle of another sentence, his Japanese fluid and self-assured. "And the beauty of the arrangement is its simplicity. The government subsidies are already locked in based on the projected output, not the long-term viability. We get paid to build it, we get paid for the energy it produces initially, and we sell it before the decay phase even begins. It's a perfect, closed loop of profit." Mr. Finch, the younger of the two investors, still looked slightly hesitant. "The risk of a whistleblower? An engineer from within your company?" Blackwood waved a dismissive hand. the large gold signet ring on his pinky finger glinting in the low light. Every key engineer on Project Nightingale has signed an ironclad non-disclosure agreement with a penalty clause that would bankrupt their great-grandchildren. More importantly, they're all receiving substantial performance bonuses tied to the project's launch. Their silence is bought and paid for. They are compromised. We are perfectly safe. He said the word compromised with a chilling finality. It was clear he saw people not as collaborators, but as assets to be managed or liabilities to be neutralized. Sophia stood beside the table, pen poised over her pad, waiting for a break in their conversation. Blackwood finally noticed her, his eyes flicking up with annoyance. He switched back to English instantly. "We're ready," he snapped, his tone brusque, as if her presence were an unforgivable interruption. She took their orders, her voice a calm, professional monotone that betrayed none of the turmoil raging inside her. Oysters for Blackwood, seared scallops for Mr. Thompson, and a foie gras torsion for Mr. Finch. As she wrote, her mind was racing. He felt so untouchable, so utterly confident in the secrecy afforded by a foreign tongue in an American restaurant. He was hiding in plain sight, using language as the ultimate cloak of invisibility. It was a brilliant, arrogant strategy, and she was the one improbable flaw in his perfect crime. She placed the order with the kitchen, her hands moving on autopilot. The head chef, a fiery Frenchman named Jean-Pierre, barked at a line cook. The sounds and smells of the kitchen, usually a comfortingly chaotic ballet, felt alien and distant. All she could hear were Blackwood's lies. For the next hour, she served them, moving in and out of their bubble of conspiracy. Each trip to the table was a fresh torment. She brought them their entrees, a dry-aged porterhouse for Blackwood, Dover sole for his guests, and all the while she listened. They moved on to discussing the specific shell companies that would be used to purchase the substandard alloys, the offshore accounts where the kickbacks from the suppliers would be routed, and the timeline for phasing out the compromised engineers after the project launch. It was a masterclass in high-level corporate crime, laid bare on a tablecloth of fine linen between sips of wine. The details were staggering. He had names, account numbers, and dates. He spoke of a man named Peterson in their acquisitions department who was handling the paperwork for the faulty materials, ensuring the trail back to Titan Energy was obscured. He mentioned a final payment to a regulatory inspector in Delaware, scheduled for the following Tuesday, to sign off on the falsified seismic stress tests for the turbine foundations. Every word was a nail in his own coffin, and he was hammering them in himself, blissfully unaware. The irony was suffocating. Here he was, paying hundreds of dollars for a meal, and the person serving it to him was gathering evidence that could cost him billions. The weight of it all was becoming physically painful. A headache began to throb at her temples. Her grandmother's face swam in her memory again. Hanai had endured so much: the war, the loss of her family, the prejudice in a new country. But she had never ever surrendered her integrity. It was the one thing no one could take from her. "A lie is a heavy stone, Sophia-chan," she had told her once. "The more you carry it, the more it grinds you into dust." Sophia was now carrying Blackwood's lie, and it was impossibly heavy. As she cleared their main course plates, Blackwood looked directly at her for the first time that night. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale, cold, and empty. There was no recognition of her as a human being. She was just a function, a pair of hands. "Dessert menu," he commanded in English. She nodded and went to fetch them. As she turned her back, he leaned in and spoke one final, chilling sentence in Japanese to his companions, a concluding thought to their criminal symposium. "Do not worry. At the end of the day, people like this," he said, and Sophia knew with sickening certainty he was gesturing towards her. "They hear nothing. They see nothing. They are furniture that breathes." That was it. That was the moment the fear curdled into a cold, hard resolve. Furniture that breathes. He had not only underestimated her, he had dehumanized her. He had relegated her, and everyone he deemed beneath him, to the status of an object, incapable of thought, observation, or moral courage. She returned with the dessert menus, her hands now perfectly steady. She placed them on the table with deliberate care. As she leaned over slightly, she met Blackwood's gaze. For a fleeting second, she allowed the mask of the deferential waitress to slip. She held his eyes in a flicker of something she couldn't quite decipher. Annoyance, confusion, crossed his face. He didn't know that he had just armed his executioner. He had confessed his sins in a sacred, forgotten tongue, and the one person in the room who understood its spirit, its kodadama, was the invisible girl he had dismissed as furniture. The meal was almost over, but Sophia's night was just beginning. The question was no longer if she would act, but how. The subway ride back to Brooklyn was a blur. The screech of the train's wheels against the tracks, the blare of a saxophone from a busker on the platform, the press of the late-night crowd. It all felt like a dream. Sophia clutched the strap of her tote bag, the one with a paint smear of ultramarine blue near the bottom, as if it were a lifeline. Inside her head, the two languages fought for dominance. The polite, deferential English she used at work, and the torrent of incriminating Japanese she had been forced to absorb for hours. She stumbled up the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment, her legs trembling with a mixture of exhaustion and adrenaline. When she unlocked the door, the familiar scent of oil paint and her roommate's chamomile tea filled her lungs. It was her sanctuary, her safe place. But tonight it felt different. The secret she carried was a toxic presence, tainting the very air she breathed. Chloe was sitting on their lumpy second-hand couch, sketching in a notepad with a charcoal pencil. She was a fellow art student, a sculptor whose loud, expressive personality was the complete opposite of Sophia's quiet intensity. She looked up, her brow furrowed with concern. "Whoa, Soph! You look like you've seen a ghost." Sophia dropped her bag by the door. The contents spilled out slightly. Her worn copy of art history, a half-eaten apple, and her server's notepad. "Worse," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I think I heard one." She sank onto the couch beside Chloe, the springs groaning in protest. For a moment she just sat there, staring at the half-finished Babel triptych that leaned against the far wall. The figures in her painting, with their mouths open in silent, colorful screams, seemed to mock her. They were trying to communicate something vital, but they couldn't, just like her. "Okay, you're scaring me," Chloe said, putting her sketchbook down. "What happened? Was it that creep from Table 9 again? Or did Robert finally achieve full cyborg status?" Sophia shook her head, a humorless laugh escaping her lips. "I wish. Chloe, I heard something tonight, something awful." Slowly, haltingly, she began to recount the evening. She explained about Gideon Blackwood, the Japanese investors, and the confident, arrogant way he had switched languages. As she spoke, she found herself translating the cold, corporate Japanese back into English, and the words sounded even more obscene in her own mouth. She told Chloe everything: the substandard alloys, the falsified reports, the plan to sell the faulty wind farms before they inevitably collapsed. The whole rotten conspiracy. Chloe listened, her usual playful expression hardening into one of disbelief, then horror. "Are you serious? Sophia, that's not just illegal. That's insane. People could get hurt. An oil spill is one thing, but a whole field of collapsing 100-ton turbines?" "He called it a maintenance issue," Sophia said, the words leaving a bitter taste. "He was so casual about it, like he was discussing a leaky faucet, not a multi-billion-dollar disaster in the making." "And you're the only one who heard it? Because you speak. I always forget you speak Japanese. It's like your secret superpower." "Some superpower," Sophia muttered, burying her face in her hands. "It feels more like a curse right now. What am I supposed to do, Chloe? Who would ever believe me? I'm a waitress. He's Gideon Blackwood. It's my word against a man who probably has dinner with senators." Chloe was silent for a long moment, the gravity of the situation settling over their small apartment like a shroud. "Okay," she said finally, her voice practical. "Let's think this through. You could go to the police. And say what? I overheard a billionaire confessing to massive fraud in Japanese while I was serving him oysters? They'd think I was crazy, or that I was trying to extort him. They'd laugh me out of the station. I have no proof. It's just what I heard. What about the press? A journalist? It's the same problem. No proof. I'm not a credible source. I'm a nobody. They'd need more than my story. They'd need evidence, documents, something tangible. Sophia stood up and began to pace the small living room, her mind a chaotic whirlwind of fear and obligation. He mentioned names, Peterson in acquisitions, a regulator in Delaware. But those are just names, it's not enough. The full weight of her dilemma pressed down on her. If she did nothing, she would be complicit in her silence. Every time she saw a news report about the miracle of Project Nightingale, she would know the truth. She would see the disaster coming, and the knowledge would eat her alive. Her grandmother's words about honor, about the straight tree in the empty forest, echoed in her conscience. But if she did something, the risks were terrifying. Blackwood was powerful enough to not only discredit her, but to destroy her. He could get her fired. He could use his army of lawyers to sue her into oblivion. He could make sure she never worked in this city again. He could ruin her chances of ever finishing art school. He could erase her future. He had called her furniture, and he had the power to break her like it. Maybe you should just forget it, Chloe said softly, voicing the fearful thought that Sophia had been trying to suppress. I know it sounds awful, but he's right about one thing. You're a waitress. This isn't your fight. It's too big. You have to protect yourself, Soph. Sophia stopped pacing and looked at her friend. She knew Chloe was saying it out of love, out of a desire to keep her safe, and every rational part of her brain agreed. Forgetting was the smart choice, the safe choice. It was the path of self-preservation. But then she remembered the look in Blackwood's eyes, the utter dismissal, the casual cruelty, the belief that people like her were invisible, insignificant, and powerless. His crime wasn't just about money or fraud. It was born from a deep-seated contempt for everyone he considered beneath him. Doing nothing wouldn't just be an act of cowardice. It would be a validation of his worldview. It would mean that he was right, that she was, in fact, just breathing furniture. She walked over to her triptych. She looked at the central panel, at a lone figure standing on a rooftop, looking out at the chaotic, disconnected city. She had painted the figure without a mouth. For weeks she'd been struggling with it, unable to decide what expression it should have. Now she knew. The figure wasn't mute because it couldn't speak. It was mute because it was afraid to. Her grandmother had lived a life of quiet dignity, but she had never been a coward. She had stood up to prejudice, poverty, and loneliness. She had taught Sophia that true strength wasn't about shouting. It was about the quiet, unshakable integrity of your own soul. To walk away from this would be to betray everything her grandmother had stood for. It would be a lie heavier than any stone. I can't, Sophia said, her voice quiet but firm. She turned to face Chloe, her eyes clear with a new, terrifying certainty. I can't forget it. If I do, I'll never be able to look at myself in the mirror again. I'll never be able to pick up a paintbrush without feeling like a fraud. Chloe's eyes widened. Sophia, what are you going to do? I don't know yet, she admitted, but I'm not going to do nothing. He thinks I'm invisible. He thinks I'm powerless. He's about to find out how wrong he is. The decision once made didn't banish the fear. The fear was still there, a cold knot in the pit of her stomach. But now it was accompanied by something else, a spark of defiant purpose. The secret was no longer just a weight, it was a weapon, and she had to figure out how to use it. The next few days were a lesson in the architecture of power. Sophia quickly discovered that knowing a terrible truth and being able to do anything about it were two entirely different realities separated by a chasm of bureaucracy and disbelief. Her first naive attempt was to contact the Securities and Exchange Commission's whistleblower hotline. After navigating a labyrinthine automated phone menu, she finally reached a weary-sounding operator. She tried to explain the situation, her voice tight with urgency. I have information about massive corporate fraud concerning Titan Energy Corp. And Project Nightingale. Do you have documentation, ma'am? The operator asked, his tone flat and disinterested. No, I overheard a conversation, Sophia said, feeling her credibility evaporate with each word. An overheard conversation? There was a pause. Are you an employee of Titan Energy? No, I'm a waitress. The silence on the other end of the line was more damning than any verbal dismissal. Ma'am, we receive hundreds of tips a day. Without concrete evidence, emails, financial records, internal memos, an overheard conversation is considered hearsay. We can't launch a federal investigation based on hearsay. If you acquire any documentation, please call us back. The line went dead. She felt a surge of frustrated anger. It was a perfect catch-22. She couldn't get proof without an investigation, and they wouldn't investigate without proof. Blackwood's system was flawless. He had insulated himself completely. Her next thought was the press. Chloe had been right. She needed a journalist, but not just any journalist. She needed someone with the reputation and the resources to take on a giant like Gideon Blackwood, someone who wouldn't dismiss her out of hand. She spent hours at the library scrolling through archives on the public computers, searching for names. She read articles about corporate takedowns, environmental scandals, and financial fraud. One name kept appearing: Penelope Vance. Vance was a senior investigative reporter for the New York Chronicle, a dying breed of journalists known for her tenacity and her refusal to back down. She had exposed a corrupt senator using shell corporations to hide bribes and had taken down a pharmaceutical company that was falsifying clinical trial data. Her articles were meticulous, built on mountains of evidence and corroborated by multiple sources. She was respected, feared, and by all accounts, utterly relentless. She was also notoriously difficult to reach. Sophia found the main switchboard number for the Chronicle and called. Penelope Vance's office, a clipped, efficient voice answered. It was clearly an assistant. Hello, my name is Sophia Rossi. I need to speak with Ms. Vance. I have information for her. It's urgent. Regarding? It's about Gideon Blackwood and Titan Energy, Sophia said, lowering her voice. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. Ms. Vance receives dozens of urgent tips about Mr. Blackwood every week. Is your information documented? There was that word again. Documented. It's first-hand testimony. I see. You can submit your information through the official tips portal on our website. Ms. Vance or her team will review it. Thank you. Before Sophia could protest, the line was dead again. She knew submitting an anonymous, undocumented tip through a web portal was the equivalent of throwing a message in a bottle into the ocean. She had one chance to make a journalist like Penelope Vance listen, and it had to be in person. She needed to bypass the gatekeepers. That night at Ethelgard's, she moved through her duties in a fog. Every clink of glass, every polite smile felt like a lie. She was a spy in her own life. She scanned the reservation list obsessively, her heart jumping every time she saw a bee. But Blackwood did not return. The secret festered inside her, growing more toxic with each passing hour. A new plan began to form, a desperate, risky gambit. She needed to get Blackwood to repeat his lies, and she needed to record it. The thought made her stomach clench with fear. It was illegal in New York to record a conversation without the consent of at least one party. But she would be that one party. The bigger risk was getting caught. If Blackwood discovered her, the consequences would be immediate and severe. But how could she get him to talk? He wouldn't confess to a waitress. He had spoken freely in Japanese because he believed he was in a cone of absolute privacy. She had to recreate that cone. She researched Blackwood's schedule online, looking for public appearances, charity galas, anything. She found that in 2 days he was scheduled to be the keynote speaker at the annual Green Futures Foundation Gala, a lavish event held at a ballroom in a 5-star hotel. Titan Energy was the primary sponsor. She also discovered that Ken Thompson and Harry Finch, the two investors, were listed on the gala's board of attendees. They would all be in the same room. It was her only chance. The problem was getting in. Tickets were thousands of dollars. She was a waitress. That evening, she confided her plan to Chloe, who looked at her as if she'd lost her mind. You're going to what? Crash a billionaire's party and try to secretly record him confessing to a massive criminal conspiracy in Japanese? Soph, this isn't a movie. This is real life. You'll get arrested for trespassing before you even get near him. I know it's crazy, Sophia said, her voice strained. But it's the only way. I have to try. I need proof, Chloe. I need something real. She had an idea. a sliver of a chance. Ethelgard's often provided catering staff for high-profile events around the city. It was a long shot, but maybe, just maybe, the next morning she went to work early. She found Robert in his small, immaculate office, reviewing staffing schedules. She swallowed her fear and knocked on the door. "Robert, do you have a moment?" He looked up, his expression impatient. "What is it, Rossi?" "I saw the notice about needing extra staff for outside events. I know it's short notice, but I saw the Green Futures Foundation Gala is tomorrow night, and I was wondering if you needed another server. I'm free, and I could use the hours." Robert raised a skeptical eyebrow. The gala was a prestigious, high-pressure event, usually staffed by his most senior, experienced servers. Sophia had only been there for 6 months. "That's a Tier 1 event, Rossi. It's not your usual dinner service." "I know," she said, trying to keep her voice steady, "but I'm a fast learner, and I'm meticulous. You know I am. I won't let you down." He stared at her for a long, uncomfortable moment, assessing her. Sophia held his gaze, praying he couldn't see the frantic desperation behind her calm facade. Perhaps he was short-staffed, or perhaps he saw a flicker of genuine ambition in her eyes. "Fine," he grunted, turning back to his screen. "Don't be late, and don't make me regret this." Relief washed over Sophia so intensely her knees felt weak. "Thank you, Robert, I won't." She had her way in. Now came the hard part. She spent the last of her savings on a micro-recorder, a tiny device no bigger than a paperclip, advertised as having a high-fidelity microphone. She practiced using it, hiding it in the small breast pocket of her server's uniform, under the lapel. She practiced starting and stopping the recording by feel alone. The night of the gala, her reflection in the mirror was a stranger. She wore the Ethelgard's event uniform, a slightly more formal version of her usual attire, and her face was pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and determination. "Be careful, Soph," Chloe whispered as she left, giving her a fierce hug. "Just be careful." The hotel ballroom was a staggering spectacle of wealth. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars hung from the ceiling, casting a glittering light over a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. Sophia and the other catering staff were briefed in a chaotic backstage area. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She was assigned to serve champagne and hors d'oeuvres to the guests in the main reception area. Her eyes scanned the crowd, a vibrant, chattering mass of the city's most powerful people. And then she saw him. Gideon Blackwood stood in the center of a rapt circle of admirers, holding a glass of champagne, looking every bit the king of his domain. A few feet away, she spotted Ken Thompson and Harry Finch, talking near the orchestra. This was it. Her hands were sweating. She took a tray of champagne flutes from the bar, her fingers trembling so badly she was afraid she'd drop it. She took a deep breath, channeling the calm, invisible persona of her job. She started the recorder in her pocket with a subtle press of her thumb. The tiny device was silent, its red light hidden by the fabric. She began to circulate through the crowd, her path a slow, deliberate spiral toward Blackwood. Her mind was a frantic cacophony. What if he doesn't talk to them? What if he only speaks English? What if they see the recorder? Finally, she saw her opportunity. Blackwood broke away from his group and moved toward Thompson and Finch. He clapped Thompson on the shoulder, his expression beaming. Sophia began to move toward them, her tray held high. She needed to get close enough to hear. Close enough for the tiny microphone to pick up their voices over the din of the party. As she neared the trio, she angled her body so her left side, the side with the recorder, was pointed toward them. Blackwood was speaking English. "A fantastic turnout, isn't it? Everyone wants a piece of the future, and we are serving it to them on a silver platter." "Indeed, Blackwood-san," Mr. Thompson replied. "Our board was very pleased with the final assurances you provided." Sophia held her breath. This was her moment. She had to provoke them, to give them a reason to switch to their private language. As she stepped up to offer them champagne, she looked past them and, in a soft, clear voice, spoke a single sentence in perfect, formal Japanese. "Excuse me, would you care for a drink?" The effect was instantaneous. All three men froze. Their heads whipped around to look at her. It was as if a janitor had suddenly started quoting Shakespeare. Blackwood's eyes narrowed, his charming smile vanishing. Thompson and Finch exchanged a startled, confused glance. There was a beat of pure, unadulterated shock. They were looking at her, really looking at her, for the first time. Not as a server, not as furniture, but as a person who had just spoken their private language. Blackwood recovered first. A dangerous, cold look entered his eyes. He leaned in very close to Thompson and, switching to rapid-fire Japanese, his voice a low, vicious hiss meant only for his companions, he said, "Who is this woman? Why does she know Japanese?" Mr. Thompson, flustered, replied in Japanese, "I have no idea. A university student, perhaps? It doesn't matter." But Blackwood wasn't letting it go. He was rattled. His arrogance had been punctured. He looked at Sophia, a strange mix of suspicion and fury on his face. He continued in Japanese, his voice dripping with contempt. "It is a security lapse. How did they hire someone like this? It's sloppy. It reminds me, Thompson-san, that we must be cautious, just like we were with that fool Peterson in acquisitions. We made sure his exit package guaranteed his silence about the alloys, did we not? We cannot afford any loose ends, not with the Delaware payment happening on Tuesday. Everything must be precise." Sophia's heart leaped. He'd said it. He'd confirmed the names, the timeline, the cover-up. It was all on the recording. Her gamble had paid off. She kept her face a perfect blank, a mask of polite incomprehension. She held out the tray of champagne. In English, her voice as bland as possible, she said, "Champagne, sir?" Blackwood stared at her for a second longer, searching her face for any sign of understanding. Seeing none, he seemed to dismiss her as a fluke, a bizarre coincidence. He snatched a glass from the tray, his knuckles brushing her hand. The contact felt like a jolt of electricity. "Get away from here," he snarled in English, turning his back on her. Sophia retreated, melting back into the crowd. Her heart was beating so hard she was sure it was audible. She didn't stop moving until she was in the relative safety of the staff corridor. She ducked into an empty alcove, her back against the wall, her hand protectively over the pocket containing her tiny, precious recorder. She had the proof. She had Blackwood's own voice, his own words, confessing the core elements of his crime. It was a desperate, insane gambit, and somehow it had worked. Now she just had to get it to the one person who could use it to burn his empire to the ground. The next morning, Sophia sent a bold email to Penelope Vance, attaching a 10-second audio clip of Blackwood's incriminating conversation. The subject line was direct. Audio file, Gideon Blackwood discussing Project Nightingale fraud. Less than an hour later, her phone rang. "This is Penelope Vance," a crisp voice said. "My office. 1 hour. Come alone." Sophia was led into a cluttered office where the legendary journalist sat behind a mountain of papers. Without preamble, Penelope said, "Play the recording." Sophia played the full audio from her laptop. The sounds of the gala filled the room, followed by the clear Japanese conversation. Penelope, stone-faced, stated, "I don't speak Japanese." "I do," Sophia replied, sliding a full transcription in translation across the desk. Key phrases were highlighted. Substandard alloys, Peterson, guaranteed his silence, and the crucial Delaware payment happening on Tuesday. Penelope read the document twice, her sharp eyes missing nothing. The professional mask finally cracked, revealing intense interest. "This is explosive. If it's true," she said, her gaze locking onto Sophia, "tell me everything." Sophia recounted her story, from her grandmother who taught her the language to the chilling dinner at Ethelgard's and her desperate gambit at the gala. Penelope listened, assessing not just the story, but the source. "You took an incredible risk," she finally conceded. "He called people like me furniture that breathes," Sophia explained. "I couldn't let him be right." That was enough for Penelope. "Arrogance. It's the fatal flaw of powerful men," she mused before snapping back into action. "This recording will be authenticated today. I'll start digging into Peterson and that Delaware payment." She then issued a stark warning. "If we run this, Blackwood's lawyers will come after you. They will try to destroy you. Are you prepared for that?" Sophia thought of her grandmother's lessons on honor. "Yes," she said firmly. What followed was a masterclass in investigative journalism. Within 24 hours, Penelope's team had authenticated the audio, confirmed former manager Charles Peterson received a massive severance package to ensure his silence, and, through a source, flagged the $250,000 wire transfer to the Delaware regulator scheduled for that very day. They had built an ironclad case. Late Tuesday afternoon, Penelope showed Sophia the mock-up of the next day's front page. The headline was devastating: Nightingale's shame. Titan CEO Gideon Blackwood caught on tape detailing multi-billion-dollar green energy fraud. "It goes to print in 3 hours," Penelope said, a grim, triumphant smile on her face. "By the time Gideon Blackwood wakes up tomorrow, his world will be on fire." The story broke not like a wave, but like a tsunami. At 5 a.m., the New York Chronicle published Nightingale's Shame, and by dawn, it was the lead story on every global news network. The audio clip of Gideon Blackwood's voice, subtitled for the world to understand, went viral, a damning testament to his arrogance. Blackwood's initial response was predictable: a furious denial. By 7 a.m., Titan Energy had released a statement decrying the story as a baseless fabrication and threatening a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. But Penelope Vance was ready. An hour later, the Chronicle released the full, authenticated recording and a follow-up story detailing the wire transfer to the Delaware official. The effect on Wall Street was catastrophic. When the market opened, Titan Energy's stock, T, went into a freefall. Billions in market value evaporated in minutes before trading was halted. The financial carnage was swift, but the human cost was just as immediate. The Japanese investors, Ken Thompson and Harry Finch, were fired, their firms severing all ties with the project. The compromised manager, Charles Peterson, was in FBI custody by afternoon. From their small Brooklyn apartment, Sophia and Chloe watched the empire crumble in real time. A text from her manager, Robert, confirmed her fears. "Don't come in, or ever." "I'm sorry," she was unemployed, a small price for the justice unfolding on her screen. She saw Blackwood, his face a mask of gray fury, shove reporters aside, his denials sounding hollow and desperate. The final blows came before sunset. The U.S. Attorney's Office announced a full-scale criminal investigation into Blackwood and Titan Energy, with federal agents raiding their headquarters. In a last desperate act of self-preservation, the company's board of directors held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Gideon Blackwood as CEO. His career, a towering monument to power, had been demolished in less than 12 hours. The invisible waitress he dismissed as furniture had orchestrated his downfall, using the language he thought was his shield as her weapon. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. Gideon Blackwood was indicted on multiple counts of fraud and bribery, his empire crumbling as federal agents dismantled his operations. Project Nightingale was officially scrapped, a monument to a spectacular lie. Sophia's identity was eventually revealed, sparking a media firestorm that cast her as the Nightingale Waitress, a reluctant folk hero. She gave one public interview stressing the importance of integrity before retreating from the overwhelming spotlight to protect her privacy. Though she lost her job at Ethel Guards, a new path opened. An anonymous cashier's check for $250,000 arrived with a simple note: "A tree that stands straight in an empty forest deserves to see the sun." Sophia knew it was from the Japanese investors. The money allowed her to pay off her debts and rent a proper art studio. Her story, combined with her undeniable talent, caught the attention of the art world. A prominent gallery offered her a solo exhibition. The show, titled The Empty Forest, was a resounding success, establishing her not as a waitress, but as a powerful artist. Months later, as news broke of Blackwood's 20-year prison sentence, Sophia hung a small piece of calligraphy in her new studio, the word Kodadama. She had been a ghost in a gilded cage, but by honoring her grandmother's forgotten language, she had found her own voice in a new beginning. Sophia's story is a powerful reminder that heroes aren't always the ones in the spotlight. Sometimes they are the quiet observers, the people in the background who we so often overlook. It shows us that integrity is not a grand gesture, but a choice made in a quiet moment, a choice to speak up when it would be easier to stay silent. One act of courage fueled by a secret skill and a refusal to be invisible was enough to unravel a web of deceit and hold immense power accountable. Her reply to Gideon Blackwood wasn't just a few words of Japanese, it was her courageous action that echoed from the ballroom to the boardroom, and finally to the courtroom. What did you think of Sophia's incredible journey? Do you believe one person can truly make a difference against such impossible odds? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of courage and consequence inspired you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to our channel for more true life stories that will leave you breathless. Thank you for listening.